I'm disappointed that I came to Canada, a Canada that it is very, very difficult to find Canadians who are passionate about the American-Canadian relationship.
The ramifications of a new relationship with the United States are immense. And one thing is clear, we cannot afford to wait this out. Canada needs to do more of that. Canada needs to diversify its trade.
In recent months, Canadians have been told repeatedly that their country is nothing more than a junior partner. The United States ambassador complained that Canada had run an anti-American campaign. Donald Trump and his allies floated the idea of Canada as the 51st state. Tariffs on steel, aluminum, autos, and farm products were designed to squeeze Ottawa until it gave in. Yet the outcome is not what Washington expected. Instead of fear, these attacks have triggered a surge of national resolve. Canada is not bending, it is changing, and in that change, it is becoming more independent than at any point in modern history.
Trump's tariff play was meant to show dominance. A 25% duty on Canadian metals and restrictions on autos and farm exports threaten thousands of jobs. But the Bank of Canada made it clear that waiting for the storm to pass was not an option. Governor Tiff Macklem told business leaders in Saskatoon that Canada must diversify, remove trade barriers inside its own borders, and open more markets overseas. The message was blunt: prosperity cannot rest on dependence. Ordinary Canadians have responded in ways that statistics make plain. According to Statistics Canada, the number of residents returning from the U.S. by car in August fell 34% compared to the same month last year, marking the 8th straight monthly decline. Air travel to the U.S. also dropped by 25% year over year. Sales of Canadian-authored books at Indigo, the country's largest bookseller, rose 25%. These are not small cultural shifts. They show a population adjusting its choices in direct reaction to American pressure. At the same time, Prime Minister Mark Carney introduced the One Canadian Economy Act to eliminate internal trade barriers and fast-track national projects. What was supposed to weaken Canada has instead sped up reforms that strengthen it. Washington thought talk of annexation would remind Canadians of their dependence. Instead, it had the opposite effect. The 51st state remark, repeated often enough by U.S. officials, reinforced the idea that Canada's identity was under threat. Consumers and politicians alike pushed harder to assert independence. Provinces most exposed to American tariffs, such as Ontario with its auto industry and Quebec with aluminum and softwood, saw public support for Buy Canadian campaigns intensify. The move by Ontario's premier to protest a Crown Royal bottling shift to the U.S. showed how symbolic gestures captured the national mood. Meanwhile, in Saskatchewan and Alberta, where oil and agriculture were spared from heavy tariffs, the tone was different but the conclusion similar. People wanted their province's products to reach global markets without relying on American approval. Each insult and each tariff, far from intimidating Canadians, built a stronger consensus that the country must stand on its own. Step back, and the pattern is unmistakable. Trump's tariffs were supposed to force concessions. Instead, they fueled consumer nationalism, unified federal and provincial strategies, and reduced the centrality of U.S. trade. Exports to the U.S. fell about 2% this year, according to Statistics Canada, but exports to other countries rose. That is diversification in action, pushed by necessity. Canada is also investing in infrastructure to move goods east and west more efficiently, so dependence on the southern border is no longer the only option. Trump wanted to corner Canada, to remind it of its smaller size and geographic limits. What he created instead was momentum for independence. Canadians are buying differently, traveling differently, and thinking differently about their place in the world. Every tariff and every slight has backfired, turning a strategy of pressure into a project of nation-building. In trying to make Canada the 51st state, Trump may have become the unexpected architect of a more independent Canadian nation.
Tariffs on canola came up unexpectedly. If they can come on fast, then come off fast. And the Chinese are just going to want something in return.
This is something that the Prime Minister has been looking at. That being said, when it comes to EVs, you saw what we announced. First and foremost, We said that we would be lifting the ZAV mandate.
Just a few days ago, President Donald Trump renewed his call for allies to stand with the United States and punish China with higher tariffs. In his vision, Canada should act like a loyal soldier, following Washington's lead no matter the cost. Ottawa did not answer directly. Instead, it sent a very different signal. Prime Minister Mark Carney's government is now considering rolling back the 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, a tariff that was originally designed to keep pace with Washington. This move looks like a bucket of cold water thrown straight into Trump's face. While he praises America first and expects others to fall in line, Canada is showing that it is ready to step out of America's shadow to defend its own economy. The shift is not accidental. It comes after China retaliated with tariffs that crushed Canada's canola industry, a backbone of prairie agriculture. Farmers in Saskatchewan, the heartland of canola, are being squeezed. On one side, Ottawa's tariff wall on Chinese EVs. On the other, Beijing's 76% duty on canola imports imposed in mid-August. For farmers, this is not abstract geopolitics. It is a simple question of survival. Can they sell their harvest without losing money? When Premier Scott Moe returned from his mission to China with a message of more constructive talks than expected, it confirmed the pressure on Ottawa to shift course.
The EV tariff was first introduced to shield Canada's auto sector and align with Washington's strategy against Beijing. But the cost has been severe. Beijing struck back by targeting canola, one of Canada's most valuable farm exports. With duties near 76%, farmers now face the prospect of selling their harvest below production cost. Scott Moe's trip to Beijing provided a rare opening. He met directly with the officials who imposed the tariffs and described the discussions as unexpectedly positive. When he returned, Carney publicly thanked him, a gesture that showed Ottawa now sees the crisis for prairie farmers as urgent as protecting auto workers. Canada is stuck in a trade-off that pits crops against cars, and the balance can no longer hold.
In Ottawa, the tone is clearly shifting. Foreign Minister Mélanie Joly has acknowledged the government is reviewing the EV tariff and exploring new imports from Japan, South Korea, and Europe. That is a clear departure from the firm stance of earlier months. On the Chinese side, the revival of the Joint Economic Trade Commission after 7 years shows Beijing is willing to re-engage. Premier Moe reported the Chinese officials expressed a readiness to look forward rather than back. These developments suggest the two sides are testing ways to recalibrate their trade relationship, not only on canola, but in a broader framework. If Canada removes the EV tariff, the immediate effect would be relief for farmers. China could ease its duties, restoring access to a premium market that Canadian producers rely on. Consumers would benefit from cheaper electric vehicles, though domestic manufacturers would face new competition. Ottawa could also seize the chance to demand that Chinese automakers build plants in Canada, creating jobs and strengthening supply chains. The political dimension is equally important. On the surface, this looks like a direct snub to Trump, who has urged Ottawa to join his tariff wall against Beijing. But in practice, it is more about pragmatism than open defiance. Canada cannot afford to sacrifice its farm economy simply to stay in Washington's good books, especially when Trump's own tariffs continue to hit Canadian metals, lumber, and energy exports. By recalibrating, Canada is signaling that it will defend its own workers and industries first. It is not abandoning the United States, but it is refusing to blindly follow. In today's fractured global economy, such independence may be the only way for Canada to navigate between two superpowers without losing its footing at home.
Starting on day one of my new administration, we will end inflation and we will make America affordable again because the prices are too high.
In the campaign, the big promise by Donald Trump was that he was going to bring down prices and make America affordable again. And everything he's done is the opposite of that.
In the midst of Trump's tariff tensions, while Canada is moving to strengthen its economy and build on its national advantages, many Americans struggle with higher costs and fading confidence. At stake is the true impact of tariffs. Will they restore U.S. factory jobs, or will they weigh the economy down into recession? President Trump entered office promising to bring prices down and make life affordable. Instead, households are facing higher costs at every corner. Grocery bills show eggs up around 16%, coffee 14%, and beef 11%, according to recent consumer price reports highlighted by critics. Automobiles and hardware are also more expensive, while health insurance renewals are forecast to climb by about 20% as tariffs lift the price of imported medicines. Utility bills are rising too, in part because new renewable projects have been slowed while demand from data centers keeps climbing. The result is a squeeze that millions of families feel daily. Inflation may not be surging at double digits, but the cost of essentials continues to climb. That sets up the first test of tariff policy. Are these measures actually making life better for workers, or are they quietly taxing consumers while missing the promised revival of factory jobs? The evidence suggests that tariffs are poorly matched to the structure of today's economy. Nobel laureate Paul Krugman has emphasized that the real drag on manufacturing jobs has long been automation and productivity, not just trade. Tariffs cannot undo that shift. In fact, higher input costs encourage firms to automate faster. The auto industry shows why. North American production is deeply integrated. A single car's components may cross the US, Canada, and Mexico borders 7 or 8 times before completion. Tariffs on steel and aluminum raise costs at every step. Instead of creating new assembly jobs, firms streamline processes and cut labor needs. Moreover, tariffs often fall on inputs rather than finished goods. That squeezes domestic manufacturers who rely on global supply chains. Companies that rushed imports before tariffs took effect have now exhausted inventories. As new orders arrive, costs climb, and businesses can no longer absorb the difference. Consumers pay more, while factories see little incentive to expand hiring. The second test is growth. Tariffs work like a selective sales tax. The Congressional Budget Office has estimated that recent tariff rounds add about 0.4 of a percentage point to inflation in 2025 and 2026 while reducing GDP and real income. The International Monetary Fund places the effective U.S. tariff rate this year above 17%, warning that it heightens risks of slower growth. Uncertainty makes the damage worse. Businesses cannot plan capital spending if tariff rates shift unpredictably from one month to the next. That climate discourages investment and hiring. Export industries face retaliation abroad, cutting orders and reducing utilization in factories at home. The Federal Reserve faces a dilemma: tolerate higher prices for longer or tighten policy and risk choking demand. Either path weighs on economic momentum. Across the border, Canada is responding to the same global shocks in a different way. Prime Minister Mark Carney has launched a Build Canada agenda that fast-tracks major energy and infrastructure projects. LNG Canada has shipped its first cargo from Kitimat. Nickel output reached 190,000 tons in 2024, nearly half of U.S. imports, positioning Canada as a critical supplier for electric vehicles and chips. Offshore wind projects in Nova Scotia are set to attract tens of billions in investment and provide clean power for export to New England. The contrast is striking. In the United States, tariffs raise costs and cloud the outlook for jobs and growth. In Canada, the crisis has become a catalyst for investment and long-term capacity. Tariffs may shift trade flows, but they cannot reverse automation or restore yesterday's factory payrolls. Competitiveness now depends on cost, certainty, and the ability to build. Canada is moving forward on that front, while America struggles with the unintended consequences of tariff policy.